Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. My name is Douglas Gabriel, Thomas Paine and the Ass of the Globalists, which I truly love being that. And today we are going to put another nail in the coffin of British Spygate. We are going to go to the top because the researchers have gone to the bottom. They've gone to the bottom of the barrel and they have pulled up the one or two people that are suspected to be the kingpins for even coordinating Stefan Halper and Richard Dearlove and the whole Privy Council. There has been research done by these amazing researchers, literally hundreds of them, who Michael McKibben is the spokesperson for, and they're going to come through Michael and tell us today, directly from Solomon's Mines, who it is that we should be watching in terms of the entire Russian dossier, because this information is so shocking, and it seems as though that Michael and his researchers are the only people who actually are paying any attention to these releases from these previous testimonies, because again and again they keep finding the one word that shows you the most important key factor that's being ignored by all the rest of the intelligence agencies. So Michael McKibben, thank you for being on the show today.
Hey, it's great to be here. Nice Friday.
Oh my goodness. You know, it is so exciting because nowadays I can't get conclave members to come to meet in the dungeon anymore, because why? We're just going to sit around and laugh. We're going to sit around and laugh at the crazy, wild, left-wing, socialist, anarchist, Democrat Party, AOC, and the whole group, Beto. I mean, we just sit around and laugh, and everything we said 2 years ago, which is beautiful, because on Trump's tweets were recently, yesterday or today, was Hannity basically saying everything that we've been saying for 2 years, and he's saying, look, folks, we've been saying this for 2 years and nobody listened. Well, that's us. We've been saying these things for 2 years, but now we're not boring. We're not going to keep with the old news. We're going to keep diving deeper. And so I'm going to let you say the magic names and see if you can't put a perspective and a frame around this, and give them some details so that they'll believe you, because what you're about to hear in terms of a dinner that you didn't get invited to is basically going to shock you. Michael, tell them what you found.
Yeah. Again, thanks to Judicial Watch, they last week issued a new round of State Department releases Department of Justice releases around Bruce Orr and his activity, Bruce and Nellie Orr. And it was about something less than 200 pages. So we started looking page by page and just reading each one. And as you know, Douglas, from doing that activity, most of the time it's like watching paint dry to go through these documents. But then about halfway through that tranche of emails, we ran across a series of emails where a dinner was being organized. And I just cut to the chase. This was a dinner that Bruce and Nellie Orr was sponsoring for a woman by the name of Alison Saunders and her entourage from London, and including her security. And, of course, we had never heard of Alison Saunders, but we have now, because once we started looking into her background, we discovered that this wasn't just any British official. This was one of the most senior British officials that we have seen involved with the testimony of Orr and Stroke and Priestap and Page and Nellie Orr and Bruce Orr and that group of people. Her name is Alison Saunders, and she is the Crown Prosecution Service Chief Prosecutor. So she is the Queen's Chief Prosecutor. And we discovered that the Orrs hosted a dinner for her and three of her staffers and plus her security at their home in McLean, Virginia. And if that wasn't interesting enough, the date of that dinner was 4 days before the Trump Tower meeting. And, of course, that is suspicious, and as we now know, we cannot believe in coincidences with anything having to do with this mess called the Mueller investigation. And that began a trek that's taken more than 2 weeks of digging and fact-checking and fact-finding. And I'll just tell you one rather humorous element of this. One of her associates is another person who was a Crown Chief Prosecutor by the name of Arvinder K. Sambai. And when researchers in the UK called the Crown Prosecution Service to get a biography on Arvinder K. Sambai, the person on the other end hung up, would not even answer any questions about this person. So every time we turned around, we found something odd about the conduct or the piece of information or the trail of relationships that these two women have in the UK. And as it turns out, I'm going to just bottom line it for you right now. It appears that Arvinder K. Sambai may be the Privy Council handler for the entire effort to take down Donald Trump. And Alison Saunders, who later had the same position as her, may have been some sort of mule under diplomatic bag to meet with the Orrs 4 days before the Trump Tower meeting to provide whatever information she would be able to, since she wouldn't go through customs in the U.S. and could bring whatever she wanted. It appears that there was a all-hands-on-deck effort by the Privy Council to make sure that the effort to take down Donald Trump succeeded before the campaign, during the campaign before the election. That's what we have concluded after almost a month of digging into these people.
Let me take a few steps back and try to frame this from, a very high altitude here. In other words, Bruce Orr, the back channel for the British Spygate group, a whole conspiracy of people, he was coordinating that through Christopher Steele 60 times in text messages, telephone conversations, and personal meetings. He was also taking from his wife, Nellie Orr, the chief person who had Russian experience working with Fusion GPS, who was creating a dossier of her own, basically, just like Glenn Simpson, the head of Fusion GPS, had his dossier of his own, and they both gave him to Bruce Orr, and Bruce Orr gave his back channel to the FBI. Didn't inform Sally Yates, didn't inform his other superiors, but he did inform 3 people when he first found out about this dossier. And the amazing thing is to know who those 3 people are. And when you hear that one of them is Andrew Weissman, then you have to ask the question, well, why is he on the special counsel? If he was one of the first people in the DOJ to handle a back-channeled fake Russian dossier that anyone would know was fake. And then Bruce Swartz, another person who is he's a British lawyer. Why is another British lawyer on the council, the special counsel? And why is then Zainab Ahmad, another person who handled the dossier from the beginning, because Bruce Orr gave it to them, why is she on Robert Mueller's special counsel? Aren't those people, in fact, part of the conspiracy? Yes, they are, but it gets worse than that. We trace them back to England, and we know that Arvinder Sambai, the person you just mentioned, who could be the kingpin, the person in charge even of Alison Saunders, the Queen's lawyer who exposed herself completely, came over with security guards, officials, in an official capacity to a personal home of 2 people who were concerned with a conspiracy, a criminal conspiracy. And then it happens to be 4 days before Robert Hannigan, the British head of their spy unit, the GCHQ, came over and set up wiretapping of Trump Towers. And then, well, let's see, Glenn Simpson, who also was meeting with the Orrs, he's had dinner with the Orrs numerous times, Nellie and Bruce, gave his beautiful little jump drive with his own little version of the Trump dirt so that they could combine it. Christopher Steele could combine it, but we have to remember someone was controlling Christopher Steele besides just Stephen Halper and Richard Dearlove, and then on up through Lord Malik Brown and Jeffrey Patty on into the Privy Council. And so what you have discovered is literally a hidden spy meeting, an espionage, subterfuge meeting, which the only reason you could ever imagine that Alison Saunders, the Queen's lawyer, would come to America is because in her pouch was a payoff. Had to be. There'd be no other reason to expose herself. Okay? And Arvinder Sambai could have done the job. She was already coordinating with everybody. Henry Kerner, McCain's man, could have done the job. He was already coordinating with Senate Intelligence Committee. Daniel Jones could have done the job. A million other people could have delivered to the auras whatever needed to be delivered. No, this would have been the most especially beautiful meeting for the conspiracy because it wasn't just what was eaten for dinner, it was the dessert. That's what we have to look and find. What was the dessert that Alison Saunders brought the auras? And I think you'll find that they probably opened an offshore account, or they have some nice De Beers diamonds, or whatever. We know that Stephen Halper made $1.4 million. Fusion GPS made $12 million. Daniel Jones made $50 million. Why shouldn't the auras get a piece of the pie?
Well, let's inject a little bit more of her background because, as it turns out, she has quite a sketchy past and a very controversial, scandalous track record of 6 years as the chief Crown prosecutor. She looked the other way on numerous rape cases. Her prosecutors were involved with fabricating evidence to convict people that were not guilty and were later exonerated. And so for her especially to come over, somebody with a very tainted resume, is very telling. And what I think it says is that the Privy Council, the people in England, the people handling the Department of Justice and the FBI and the CIA and the State Department and the White House over here were probably desperate to get Trump out because he would be a wrecking ball for their 100 years of effort to organize this new world order, which we now know that the British Privy Council, through its various companies, through its various Queen's Golden shares, and through its association with companies that came out of the British East India Company, was on a very long, committed trek to establish a new form of British empire based on their New World Order corporatist model. And I really think that they were desperate, and they had to send over the most senior person they could, who they could get through all the security. But the other curious thing, Douglas, is that woman's name, Alice Saunders, has never been mentioned in any testimony, in any evidence, anywhere. And then when we saw the recent Peter Strzok information, his testimony, we discovered that he refused to answer any questions about the May-June timeframe, the preparation for this meeting, which we see the evidence now happened in May, or the June meeting. He refused to answer all questions related to that time period, and his specific reason was because he had to protect a very sensitive source, and that's a quote.
Well, she is a sensitive source. She's, as high up as you go you might as well say that the Queen sent her over herself. It's unbelievable.
Well, I mean, it certainly could be. But what we think it is, we think the sensitive source was probably Source Suz, and it was Alison Saunders and Arvinder K. Sambai. Because the other interesting thing that you discovered, and you first put me on it, is that Arvinder Sambai was actually representing the FBI in London at the time of 9/11. So she would have worked for the newly appointed Robert Mueller at 9/11. So the question is, what is somebody from the Chief Crown Prosecution Office in London doing working for the FBI at 9/11? And that would have been working for Robert Mueller. So the sensitivities that they would have had to anything related to the Crown Prosecution Service would certainly have caused Peter Strzok to refuse to answer any questions. And that seems to be how this goes, because when you start looking at the background of Allison Saunders, I won't go into all the details and how all this emerged, but I can bottom line it by saying it is very clear that the relationships involved with Sir Geoffrey Patty, Lord Mark Malloch Brown, George Soros, Sir Nick Clegg, Baron Richard, Baron, what's his last name? Baron Richard Allen, and then the Rothschilds and the Rothschilds banks are definitely in her background and in her deep relationships through a public school system called the Eastbourne College. And through that set of relationships among that board of governors, we even find Margaret Thatcher's Rothschild's chairman, banker friend, who was the person who would have set up all of the Queen's golden shares that now control all of the valuable British companies that are spread out all over the planet. So Allison appears to be their go-to gopher for all things Privy Council. That's what we've concluded.
Yes, and then after that she became, she was disgraced and hated. And basically everyone knew that she was corrupt, and she protected very corrupt pedophiles and all kinds of problems. And she then didn't even get her knighted. What do they call that? She didn't get her dameship.
A dameship.
Her dameship.
Damehood. They call it a damehood.
Few people ever.
There was actually a petition put it to Parliament to prevent her from getting a normal damehood because of the scandals that she had allowed during her 6 years. So she's not a liked person now, and yet as soon as she resigned, she was swept up in probably one of the most corrupt law firms on the planet, Linklater's, in London, where she is now. So and people are protecting her.
Your research has shown that once you've been a disgraced top lawyer for the Queen and you've done her dirty work during the 2016 election, and you were the payoff to the Orrs and whoever else was part of the conspiracy that needed the British payoff, then you get to go to one of the Magic 8 big law firms that make the most money in Britain, and you get to work for the Rothschilds. And once you work for the Rothschilds, and here's the sad news is Michael McKibben sent some of his researchers down to the mines. We haven't seen them since, but they have sent up a bunch of loads, and it's all about the Rothschilds. And now his researchers are onto the Rothschilds, and oh my goodness. It's just endless. It's absolutely endless. And so when you're talking about this, when you say Rothschild, you need to remember, Rothschilds represent the Queen and the Bank of England. The Bank of England is the Queen's. No one is allowed to ask questions about the Bank of England. Therefore, you're not allowed to ask questions about the Rothschilds. You don't even know who the appointee is, but we certainly know who the appointee is. The Queen appoints one person to take care of her business at the Bank of England. No one can ask about it. She can't really be audited. You don't even get to know who the person is. We know who it is. Of course, it's a Rothschild. Well, it's a scam that's been going on for so long. So when you're talking about anywhere you want to look, whether it be the Golan Heights, you're going to find a Rothschild. Doesn't matter. If it's serious flow of money, you're going to find the Rothschilds, and you're going to find the following. You're going to find these lawyers, and I'm going to name some of the groups they work out of. But in every single case, you're going to find out whether it's Andrew Weissman, whether it's Zainab Ahmad, whether it's Arvinder Simbai, whether it's Allison Saunders, whether it's Joseph Mifsud, whether it's it doesn't matter. Every single one of these people is a lawyer, and they represent international crime, fraud, and always counterterrorism, because they are counterterrorists. That's what they do. They handle propaganda, and they all are trained either out of the Link Campus University, which is owned by Stephen Rowe. That's where Mifsud taught. And just recently I heard this. This is
that
beautiful.
The one in Malta?
Yeah. Oh, how about this one?
In Rome.
Just found this out. John Roberts, after he changed up his opinion on all the major decisions during the Obama administration. He went to Malta, to the University of Malta, the very university I'm speaking of, which in Rome it's called the Link Campus University, extension of the University of Malta. And John Roberts went to this University of Malta, people don't even know it exists, to give a talk. That was his payoff, folks. That was his offshore account, in case if you didn't realize. When you say Malta, you say rogue CIA, you say offshore accounts, you say the Vatican Bank offshore accounts, and you basically say rogue CIA, and their home is in Rome, and that's where the Link Campus University and Michael Gaeta set up George Papadopoulos through Joseph Mifsud. Well, Joseph Mifsud is a friend, personal close friend of, that's right, Zainab Ahmad, Arvinder Simbai.
There's photos out there of them giving conferences together. It's really clear Mifsud is a British agent, always has been.
Oh, yeah. And to say that he was a Russian trying to give Papadopoulos the 32,000 emails of Hillary's, nonsense. Joseph Mifsud was one of the first people that Mueller interviewed, and then, well, actually, he wasn't one of the first, but after he interviewed him, he disappeared. Let's remember, Joseph Mifsud, personal good friends, very, very, very dear friends with who? Bill Clinton, John Brennan, Robert Mueller, Arvinder Simbai, the same old crew, Nainab Ahmad, Dmitry Alperovitch. He was connected to the Atlantic Council. He was connected to CrowdStrike. When you, and in his group, the London Academy of Diplomacy, basically train the Saudi intelligence agents, especially the ones who go rogue. And so this is where the rogue CIA goes. They go to these groups. And the people I've just mentioned run them. They own them. The London Academy of Diplomacy, the London Center for International Law Practice, the Global Center for Cooperative Security, the Valdi Discussion Club, Halulet, Orbis Business International. These are all corrupt people who got out of intelligence and joined what I call the rogue CIA, and basically they train each other on how to rip off the world through international law and then how to cover it through counterterrorism. And that's who Alison Saunders is, and that's who Arvinder is.
That's right.
And Arvinder Simbai, do not forget that she is, and still is, working directly for Mueller, and has been ever since 9/11. She's been the FBI representative in Britain. She is the FBI's counsel in Britain, but she's a Brit.
One of their clear operating principles is to create about 5 or 6 threads of a story and make them all different, so they get them all going simultaneously, and only they know the one they're going to use, and they float them all. That's why we see probably 15, 20, 30 people involved with all these stories around the dirty dossier. And you're right, they get all of these lawyers out there pushing these various quote narratives, lies, all over the planet, and that's the way they cover themselves. And it appears to me that they almost got away with it, but that we have a strong president who stood up against them, and they finally had to prove one of those threads and haven't been able to prove a single one. And on the one hand, what I think this is telling us is that the New World Order people that really come out of the Cecil Rhodes 200-year plan at time of World War I and forward, they're 100 years into that plan. And it is very much a plan run out of Britain, run out of the banks in the City of London and the Rothschild family. They want to maintain power and control throughout the world. And I think that they thought they almost had everything put together. They got the Clintons involved. They got the senior executive service here involved, and they put their people in at the Department of Justice and the Commerce Department and the White House and in our judiciary. And this is a very long, patient plan. And I think they thought they pretty much had it done, and then Donald Trump came along. And the specter of Donald Trump freaked them out. And I really think they started having to move too fast for themselves. They're used to very slow, methodical corruption. And Donald Trump was forcing them to move quicker. And in doing so, they left trails. And those are the trails that our researchers have picked up. And you tell me if you agree with this, because what I see in what Judicial Watch just found is this huge crumb. I mean, this is a whole loaf of bread in a email from Allison Saunders' secretary to Bruce and Nellie Orr that apparently nobody else knew about in the Department of Justice, although there were some emails that were hidden on those documents, which is interesting. But anyway, where they're organizing a private meeting with a lower-level American employee during an election cycle, where she's coming over, a very senior person, and not meeting with her equals in this country. What I think that email shows, that dinner with the Orrs email shows, I think it proves espionage on behalf of the Privy Council, and I think it proves treason on behalf of at least Bruce and Nellie Orr. Am I wrong?
No, beyond a shadow of a doubt.
This?
Beyond a shadow of a doubt, there's no other way you can interpret that. It's the same thing as when Robert Hannigan came over and met with his non-equivalent. His equivalent would have been Admiral Rogers at Fort Meade, Maryland, NSA, because Robert Hannigan was the head of the British NSA, called the GCHQ, General Communications Headquarters, and he literally came over and met with John Brennan, the head of the CIA, because of a CIA counterintelligence attack against Trump, and they needed to use one of their five eyes. Now, I like to call them the five spies. And we need to poke out those eyes because they're not helping us. They are harming us, and this is the perfect example. This is British Spygate. So when Hannigan came over, he didn't meet with Rogers, his equivalent. He met with John Brennan. That is completely absurd. That showed right there. And that's what caused them to have to admit. And they still try to make fun of Trump for saying he was wiretapped at the Trump Towers. He was physically wiretapped so that they could get the emails between Rod Goldstein and Natalia Veselnitskaya and the other ones who set up the meeting. And so they wanted something more than just Manafort's phone or everyone else's phone that was in 2 jumps above or below him. So they literally brought over Robert Hannigan and didn't tell Admiral Rogers that they were using Admiral Rogers' facility, Fort Meade, Maryland, the home of NSA. I know, I used to work there, to spy on Trump Towers. And so when Rogers found this out, he went to Trump Towers and told them, and he also said he's demanding an audit of the FISA court because they've been using raw NSA data, unmasking it and spreading it everywhere, and with absolutely no controls, and that they had completely abused the international and national domestic forms of the FISA courts. So they did an audit, and they found that everything he said was true. Of course, what did the rest of the intelligence community want to do? What did Clapper want to do? What did Brennan and what did Comey want to do with Rogers? Fire him for telling Trump the truth. But this is the same thing. Allison Saunders couldn't have possibly, no way, no how, nowhere, have been able to have a meeting like this without, first off, the Privy Council knowing, and second off, it being espionage. There's no way. They never knew the Orrs before. They knew that he was the back channel. Allison knew they were the back channel. And so did anyone in London who was paying attention reading the newspaper, because it was in the newspaper every week about George Papadopoulos and blah, 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 blah. Everybody knew this, okay? Everybody knew about Joseph Mifsud. Everybody knew that Papadopoulos was being considered Trump's number one man, though he never spoke with Trump, and he was only in one meeting where somebody named him. Trump never even noticed him.
One of the things that pops out hugely in this information is it's obvious that Papadopoulos and Carter Page were newbies who these guys were all manipulating as pieces of the story that they needed to make this narrative hold together. What amazes me is how many people were involved. And I don't know if you like the Star Trek series, but it looks like a hive mind was in action here. And the hive mind were all freaked out by the presence of Trump. And it looks to me like they all started moving in parallel, in sync, to get this discrediting dossier to come to life. And so in doing so, they all colluded with each other. Now, the one thing I will point out in all this collaboration between America and England, you always read about this special relationship that America and England has. Well, I think we've pointed this out before. There was a secret agreement signed in 1946 among the intelligence officials for the U.S. and Britain and the Commonwealth that we were going to share all intelligence data with each other, and we weren't even going to tell people about the existence of the agreement itself. And that didn't come to light until 2010. So it's quite likely that these people have used that agreement as their excuse for freely sharing across the Atlantic without any worries about espionage or treason or anything else. But I think here's what's different about Alison Saunders. She was a very public British official, not apparently an asset of MI5 or MI6, but we don't know that for sure. But here she is coming over to the U.S. during an election, which is clearly election meddling. I mean, are you kidding me? 4 days before the Trump Tower meeting, the obvious setup.
No way around it.
This is espionage.
Has to be. Has to be. How come? For instance, folks, think of this. What if our Attorney General went over to a secret meeting with people who were planning to overthrow the Queen of England?
Exactly.
There. That's the perspective. Now, here's the reality. The Queen of the hive mind is either the Queen herself, or in this case, it's Arvinder Simbai, who is also controlling even Alison Saunders, because it was Arvinder Simbai who is the rogue intelligence agent. She's the one who literally... She owns and started and owned and got money from very corrupt people for the London Center for International Law Practice. And they always use these fancy, nice names, virtue signaling, that they are all these wonderful things. No, they're not. These are all corrupt organizations. They're like the Cambridge Intelligence Groups, which are found all folded, or the Strategic Communications Laboratory, or Cambridge Analytica. They're folding. Why do they fold? Because when they were founded, they had 3 other dummy companies ready, so when they got caught, they simply went to their dummy companies. And so all these people are still doing the same thing, folks. None of these Brits, because they are not citizens. They are subjects. And once you are on the Privy Council, you're part of the hive mind, and you can do crimes for the Queen just like the Jesuits can do crimes for the Pope. It's the same exact pecking order. Actually, they were built on the same thing. Yep. And so the Privy Council is basically an insider trading group of people on committees who don't even know who are on the other committees, and nobody knows who controls anything. But if you're
another little aspect of this, the way the Brits organized their corruption, that really opened up the background on Alison Saunders was her association with Eastbourne College, this very expensive high school, prep school in England. They call public schools. And you see this board of governors, which is the list a mile long. And when you start digging into the layers of their relationships, that's where we found the probably 600 or 700 Rothschild entities that she was directly related to through some of the other governors of this particular school. And I was just, in traveling today, I was speaking with one of our British expert contacts, and he said, in his studied opinion, probably 3 to 5% of the British public schools in England are the breeding ground for these deep state rogue people associated with the Privy Council. He estimated it wasn't probably higher than 5. But in those schools, they have these very active alumni associations that meet once or more a year. And, you got to wonder, it's kind of weird for a group of high schoolers to keep meeting every year all through their career. And unless you really understand what's going on, what's really going on, we believe, is that these alumni groups are their networking organizations for all this collaboration, conspiracy, and collusion they're doing around the world to protect their interests, their financial interests, and their political interests. And so what better excuse to get together than to say, well, I'm going to a alumni meeting. It's an easy one. That's the way they get away with it.
Now, I'm going to go ahead and take the next step. But Jimmy Savile was given a knighthood by Prince Charles, knowing that he was the biggest pedophile on the face of the earth. So when we're talking about these old boy clubs, these schools, these are grooming schools for lesbians and for homosexuals. Let's not mince any words here. Pedophilia in Britain is basically so accepted that they recently tried to lower the age of consent to age 6. When they got some flack on that, they made a huge compromise and they said they would raise it to age 10. And so right now they're debating whether they're going to lower consent age for a girl or a boy to age 10. That's who we're dealing with, okay? So when we're dealing with these people, we're not dealing with the standard common person in Britain, who we all love. Michael and I both live there. We are dealing with the people at the top who have an old boy club that goes back as a corporate dynasties, a monarchical. Now, why is there still a monarchy in the face of the earth that has more money in offshore accounts than all the Commonwealth nations that the Queen has ripped off to put into those offshore accounts? Why does the Queen actually have more money than all of her countries that she is supposedly in charge of? And
because when the British divested themselves of all their colonies, they created the Commonwealth, and they maintained control of all of the mining and resources of those countries. So they never really gave up anything other than some political control. But then that's where people like Lord Mark Malloch Brown stepped in, and he provided the electronic voting machines to these organizations, or controlled the elections through the UN, and they put in the puppets that they wanted. So that's how they've maintained control.
Yes. Also, they have insider trading through the Knights of Malta and all their different insider groups, but they also don't pay taxes. Monarchs only recently, gave lip service and said she was worth a few hundred million. I think she said she was worth, the Queen of England said she was worth 400 maybe million. Insanity. Only an idiot could believe that. That is so stupid. And she doesn't pay taxes. So the taxes they paid were some little pittance that they turned around and donated back, but they can't be questioned, so nobody could look into their business. Oh, that's right. So is the same with the Pope. The Pope, who receives hundreds of billions of dollars a year for refugees, who keeps begging us to have open borders.
Wait, where does he receive that money from?
From refugees, from the United Nations, from the America, from all the countries.
The UN pays him?
Yes. I know it's hard to believe.
For each person who becomes a refugee, the Catholic Church is getting money for what?
Correct. For giving
for
them,
what?
Well, all they really do is they put them into a UN-approved computer system, and whatever name they give the representatives in the refugee camps, whatever name they give, and they put it in there, they get money for that. And remember, the United Nations, through Guterres, who's now the head of the United Nations, before that he was the High Commissioner for Refugees, well, I can't even tell you how much money they were being given. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year.
So they're getting the money. Are they having to provide any service?
No. I was just going to say, have you ever seen the Catholic Church giving money to the supposed migrants who are really invaders coming up through Greece all into Europe? Did you ever see anybody, or did you ever see anyone take responsibility for giving food and water and aid to all those people? Just like in Mexico, we've caught them now, and we know who pays those people now. And it's a little bit shocking when you see it. It's the Catholic Church, through Chicago, through an organization that has a Spanish name, so you don't know what it means. They literally hired trucks, those flatbed trucks and the buses.
Yeah.
Those aren't George Soros. Those are Catholic relief organizations. Because every refugee who comes into America that, gets asylum, we have to pay. We don't only just pay You cannot believe it. If I gave you the quotes of how much a refugee makes when they come into this country, you would call me a liar. But let's just say we pay them more than we pay any of our vets. Okay? Every refugee makes more when they come into this country. And the only thing that we actually do here in America, because we do not vet them, is we pick them up at the airport and bring them to they can go under the name of Baptist or Lutheran, but look closely, they're Catholic services. But they're not really Catholic services. They're Catholic services that are private. So if any one of them gets caught because you can't believe what they do, those refugees come up missing. We've looked for them. No one can find them. We know where they went, but nobody wants to talk about it. It's like the Missing People Bureau in the FBI. Oh, there is none. If you have a missing person in America, no one cares. How can that be possible?
There is an organization, one of the companies directed by one of the directors of the governors of the Eastbourne School, where Allison Saunders was a governor, is called Missing Persons Limited.
I'm sorry to have to tell you that I've looked into this quite deeply. And the people who say that they want you to call them to report a missing person goes out and picks up the person that you called about.
Yeah.
That's what happens. They almost recover nobody. These are private organizations, private corporations. They recover like less than 2% of the people who were called in because the FBI won't take a call and your local government and law enforcement won't take a call for missing persons. Why? Because human trafficking is so big. So anyone who doesn't believe in a border wall like George Soros and the EU and Open Society and Angela Merkel and Macron and these crazy people and Canada and Trudeau and Mexico, human trafficking, folks, look, where are the people who came across the border that were in California that were on the streets? Where are they now? Now, I want to close this, but I want to first off, I want to thank you because the researchers, and now you have all your researchers so well trained, that when they see in a Judicial Watch emails of Nellie Orr, they see the name Allison Saunders, they say, who? Bruce Sorts? Who's that? Well, let's look. Holy Lord! Look who this is. If that woman would have come in this country and not made a formal announcement to anyone, it would have been a political scandal beyond imagination. It does not happen.
Correct.
It does not happen. It does not happen. We now find out that just Bill Priestap going to London, the head of the FBI counterintelligence division, now that has come out, that's such a huge scandal that they're looking at, he's going to be in some kind of gigantic trouble. Well, how about Nina Haspel, the head of the London...
Stroke was in London in May also. He wouldn't answer questions about that.
Correct. They will not answer questions about when Allison came over, Allison Saunders. They will not answer questions about who was controlling Michael Gaeta, where's Joseph Mifsud, who's Stephen Rowe. They won't answer questions about how much did Oleg Deripaska give to John McCain. John McCain is the one dealing with the Russians. Now, when you looked and you saw Bruce Orr's testimony, I believe it was, and you saw the word VeriSign, he slipped up and said his wife went to VeriSign. So after she worked with the CIA, open source, she took all that information, Nellie Orr did, worked for Fusion GPS. They got paid $12 million. When she wrote her own nasty document on Trump, and she looked up every single person who's in the dossier, so she was part of it, she then worked to work for VeriSign, which is how Hillary controls the crypto keys, so she can have a better access to surveil and to plant documents and to basically do absolute full-on espionage, sabotage.
Could that have been their insurance policy?
That's their double insurance policy, and that's what Allison was coming to pay her off for, or at least give her a nice thank you. Maybe Allison brought the dessert and it was a cheesecake. That could have been the payoff, because the Orrs worked really, really, really hard. They put their careers on the line. She quit her job twice so that she could get better information. For who? For Hillary Clinton. Remember, Nellie Orr was working for Hillary Clinton. Let's just make this real plain and clear. She was the person assigned from Fusion GPS for Hillary Clinton's fake Russian dossier, which was paid for by John Podesta and, the DNC. And
well, do recall that when the VeriSign name came up, we started looking at VeriSign in London, and if you'll recall, the connections were unmistakable to Al Jazeera. So there is a very strong Al Jazeera VeriSign connection here. So it's a very tangled web of intrigue, and that's why I like to bottom line it. As far as I can tell, at least we can see from this dinner with the Orrs that there was espionage and treason, and that's hard proof.
It would be unimaginable to come up with anything sensible other than that. So it's maybe partially circumstantial, but it is not partially circumstantial that the entire Congress, the Senate, the Department of Justice, the FBI, the NSA, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence didn't notice Allison Saunders' name.
Right.
Isn't that a coincidence?
And she never
they didn't
came up
notice?
in any testimony.
Isn't that amazing? The one person at the wrong place at the wrong time, seemingly coordinating the back channels and the fake frame-ups with Natalia Veselnitskaya, who met with Glenn Simpson the day before and the day after the Trump Tower setup, which was set up by Robert Hannigan, which was the Brits. Come on, they'd already started setting up George Papadopoulos since March. We know that everything they say that the counterintelligence investigation started Crossfire Hurricane in late July. Lie! We told you it started in 2000. It actually started in 2015. In December, we started to see the tracks unbelievably, but we also know it started even before that. And just yesterday, someone came out and said what we told everyone from the beginning. The FBI was involved and tried to seize the DNC server from April of 2015 on, and they would not let it go because George Soros did not put $4 billion into that computer and have it hide there, and they weren't stealing money from everybody, including Bernie, and they weren't fixing all the primaries to give that DNC server up because they would have found out that Imran Awan had total access, that Brian Pagliano knew that it was completely open and it was pay to play, that the Russians had access. Everyone had access. Everyone had access. If you paid to play, you were simply given her password. And Huma Abedin had access for the Sisterhood, the Muslim Sisterhood, the Muslim Brotherhood. Everybody had access through Imran Awan. He was selling it to anybody who wanted it. So I want to thank you and your researchers for keeping your eyes peeled and for being able to, with one teensy tiny clue, when you smelled that it was wrong, you have basically overturned the moneylenders' tables. You have brought this back to the very people who believe Trump is such a disruptor, they would spend their entire fortune to take Trump out just for the sake of taking him out, and that's the Rothschilds. And Allison Saunders is the Rothschilds representative. And Arvinder Simbai is rogue intelligence, who I don't think works for anybody. She's counterintelligence, and I bet she got a nice payoff too. So thank you researchers, thank you for Leader Technology, shareholders who allow you some time to work with us and coordinate all these different people. Thank you to the Conclave, thank you to Betsy's team, which just amazing, and the people that you've added to this team from all over the world. Folks, when we are telling you something, it comes from research all around the world, and we challenge anyone to find that something that we've said is wrong, or to please send us something that might add to it, or to send something that would prove that we are wrong. Because otherwise, we're going to give the truth out, because that's what Trump needs to win this second American Revolution.